Alright, welcome back everyone. I'm Nick. This channel is Swiftful Thinking, where we cover all things Swift and SwiftUI related. And in this awesome video, we're going to look at the drag gesture. Now, if you've been following this course, we've done a couple gestures already, but I do have to say that the drag gesture is the most important and most common of all of these gestures. And I saved it for the end of this gesture section because it can be a little more complicated to implement. But of course, we're gonna walk through a couple of real-world examples in this video so that you can easily implement it in your own apps. The drag gesture, again, is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you drag something around the screen. But more importantly, in SwiftUI, we can use the drag gesture for really cool features such as swiping on cards. If you ever use Tinder, you could use a drag gesture to swipe the cards left and right. And we can also use the drag gesture to swipe up or swipe down different screens in our app. Both of those examples we're going to actually do in this video, and that's why it's going to be a little bit longer, but I definitely recommend sticking around for the entire video because a lot of this logic is really helpful when you're trying to build complex UI. Alright everyone, that's enough of an intro. I think you guys are ready for this. I'm excited to bring it to you. Let's jump into Xcode and take a look. Alright everyone, I'm back in our Xcode project, of course. Let's right click on the navigator, let's create a new file, and this will of course be a SwiftUI view. Let's call it DragGesture Bootcamp. Go ahead and click create, and I am super excited to share this one with you guys because the drag gesture is so important. It's probably the most common of all of these gestures in SwiftUI apps, and you're about to see why. So let's click resume on the canvas, make sure we're all connected. Let's get coding here. We're going to start out with the basics here, and then we're going to dive into two really advanced examples of how to use drag gestures. So for the basics, let's just add a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of maybe 20. Let's give it a frame with a width and height. Let's do maybe, 100 by 100 is fine. We don't need the alignment. And let's add a gesture. So we'll do .gesture. We'll do a drag gesture, open and close parentheses. You guys should be used to this by now because we've done these gestures in a couple of videos in a row now. So if we call it .on, we have the changed and ended. And on changed, open brackets, value in. And on ended, open brackets, value in. And this is just the translation, the distance between where it is now and where we are dragging it to. And that value is actually a CG size. So let's create a variable at the top at state var. And we're going to call it offset because it's the distance between where it currently is to where we are dragging it to, of type CG size equals, and we'll set it equal to .0 to start. We're going to use this offset to literally offset the rectangle. So we'll call it .offset. And we have this completion here with a CG size. That's nice and handy. And we're going to pass in our new offset variable. On change, we're just going to set the offset equal to value.translation. And I noticed that looks a little better if we add some animation here. So let's actually do with animation .spring, open brackets, and we'll set it equal to value.translation. And then on ended, let's set it back to 0 so that it bounces back to our current spot. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it here. So with animation spring offset equals .0. And .0 is basically just a CG size where you have the width of 0 and height of 0. But a shorter way to write it is just .0. Alright, let's test out this very basic example. Let's put it on a simulator because it doesn't work well on the canvas here. So I'm going to open up the navigator. I'm going to copy this drag gesture bootcamp. I'm going to go into our app.swift file, paste it as the first view in our app, and then I'm going to go back and let's click run on the simulator to get the simulator to pop up. And I'm using an iPhone 12, of course, because that is probably the best looking simulator we have right now. And if I click and drag it, I can now drag the box all around the screen, and when I let go, it bounces back. And I can do this with one finger. I don't need two fingers for this gesture. So this is nice. This is looking really nice and really smooth, honestly. There is a little delay between when I'm moving it and where it goes, and that's because it's the spring animation that's adding that delay. So if you don't like that, you can either add a shorter animation or even no animation if you want no delay. But personally, I find that this spring animation looks pretty natural and pretty nice. So that's what we went with. And of course, it's bouncing back to the starting space on ended, which is what we added the code down here. So this is a very simple version of how a drag gesture works, but there are a lot of use cases on when we might be dragging something. We're going to go through two really prominent examples right now. So for the first example, we actually don't even need to change that much. I'm just going to go back into our code here, and let's close the navigator just to give it a little extra room. And let's change the frame. Let's make the width of this 300, and let's make the height 500. Click resume on the canvas to see what we're looking like. And this looks like a card. And if you've ever used Tinder or Bumble or any kind of dating app, you've probably recognized this. But if you, instead of using this rounded rectangle, if you used like a VStack or something with some content in it, where you had a user, an image, a user's name, maybe their age, you could see how this could turn into a card for swiping on an app like Tinder. And let's play around with that quick. So I'm going to run it on the simulator, and we can now move the card around and it bounces back. And if you've ever used Tinder, when it goes to the left or to the right, the card actually kind of gets a little smaller and it rotates as if it's going to go off the screen a little bit. So let's add some of that rotation in while we're using our drag gesture. So some of this might seem a little complicated because we now need to pretty much track what the actual value.translation is, rather than just letting it animate. So to do that, I'm going to put some values on the screen so you guys can see it more easily. So let's hold the command button, click on the rounded rectangle, and let's embed it in a Z-stack. And then before we add the rounded rectangle, I'm going to add a V-stack, open brackets, and I'm just going to add a text here with two quotes, and I'm going to use the backslash, open and close parentheses. I'm going to put in the offset dot width here. So this is the offset of whether we're going left or right on the screen. And let's give it a spacer underneath it so that it pushes it to the top. So this is just our offset. So now if I move this, I can see that it's offsetting, 170 if I go that way, back to 0, and then maybe negative 170 if I go that way. So based on what that offset is, I want to add some more animations to this rectangle. So the first thing I want to do is the scale. So I'm going to call it .scale. And we used the scale in some previous videos, so you should be used to it. And if I do scale of 1.0, it's the current size. If I do scale of maybe 0.5, it's going to be 50% of the current size. So we're going to animate it down a little bit as we move towards the edges of the screen. So right now, let's put this back at 1.0. And I'm going to create a function to get the scale because there's a little bit of logic that would be a little complicated to put it right in here. So down under our body here, so I'm going to go to the bottom of the body. I'll double click the open brackets in the body to get to the bottom. And let's create a func, get scale amount. Open and close parentheses, and we want this to return a CG float, open brackets. Because a CG float is what this value is here. This is a CG float that it accepts in our scale effect. All right. So now we need to do some basic math. And first we're going to find what is the maximum amount we can go to the right or the left of the screen. So we're going to say let max equals the UI screen dot main dot bounds dot width divided by 2, right? Because we have the whole screen, but this card can only go pretty much, but we're starting in the middle, so it can only go pretty much half of the screen to the left or half of the screen to the right. So this is the maximum amount we can go left or right. Then let's get the current amount on where the card actually is, so the number that would be up here. So let's say let current amount equals, and we're already tracking that amount with the offset at the top of our screen. So we'll say current amount equals offset dot, and we're going to use the width because we're only tracking this whether it goes left or right. We're not tracking it if it goes up or down. And when we ran this, you notice that when we went left, it went to the negative 175. When we went right, it went to the positive 175. So what we're going to do on this current amount is actually add we're actually going to get the absolute value of this. So we'll do ABS, which stands for absolute, and open and close parentheses, and just put the offset.width inside. So if the offset.width is now negative 175, the absolute value of that is just positive 175. So whether or not we're going left or right, we're going to get a positive number here. Then we're going to say let percentage equals the current amount divided by the maximum amount. So this is what percent are we to the left or the right from the starting amount. And then we're just going to return a scale amount. So we will return, and our scale, we want to start out at 1.0, right? Because that's the current size of the card. So I'm going to do 1.0 minus percentage. So if I click resume on the canvas, and let's actually put this scale amount into our code. So back where we have this 1.0 on the scale effect, let's call get scale amount. And this function is going to run every time we move it. So if I move it now, it should pretty quickly move to the left or the right. And this looks good, but obviously this is not the intended effect that we have. So when we go to the left or the right, it's going to start scaling down. Now the first thing is that it's scaling too much. I want it to only scale maybe a little bit, maybe to about 60% of the current size, not fully. So right now, if we go all the way to the right of our screen, if we're 100% to the right of our screen, this is going to be 1.0 minus 1.0. And what I want it to be is, if I go all the way to the right of the screen, I want it to be less than the actual percentage. I want it to stop maybe at when it's scaling to 0.5. So instead of just adding percentage here, I'm going to add min, and we're going to use the XY to compare two values. We'll do percentage and 0.5. So if this percentage is up to like 100%, this min is going to stay at 0.5. So let's move the card around now. And we can see that it still scales, but it does eventually stop when we get to 0.5, which is great. But this still is scaling a little too drastically for me. The gradient that it's scaling down at is too fast. So what I'm going to do is basically just take this amount and then cut it in half even further. So I'll do times another 0.5. So this will slow down the rate of change basically by 50% of whatever it currently was going to be. So now if we click and drag it, we have a much more natural looking change of the scale here. And this is much more what it looks like in Tinder or Bumble, where you have our app and we can start going to the left. And the last thing I want to do on this is now also rotate the card so that it rotates to the right a little bit, or it rotates to the left a little bit. So again, we're going to have to create another function and add some logic. So we'll say func get rotation amount, open and close parentheses, and this needs to return a double, open the brackets. We're going to start it off again the same. We're going to say let max equals uiscreen.main.bounds.width divided by 2. Then we're going to say let current amount, and this is going to equal to the offset.width. And we're going to keep this as the offset.width. We're not going to use the absolute value, because if we're going to the left, I want to rotate to the left. And if we're going to the right, I want to rotate to the right. Whereas on the scale, we did the same scale whether or not we were going left or right. So now we actually need so now we actually want that negative value. We're again going to get the percentage. We'll say let percentage equals current amount divided by max. And then we need to convert this percentage into a double, because we need a double for the rotation. So we'll say let percentage as double equals, and we can do this by just typing in double, open the parentheses, and putting our percentage inside. And this will just convert the CG float into a double. So this percentage, if I hold the option button, this percentage was a float, this percentage was a CG float, this percentage as double is now a double. And then we need an angle, so we'll say let max angle. This is the maximum amount I want to rotate the card. This will be of type double, and we'll set it equal to 10, which is a fairly small angle, but it will look pretty good. And then finally we need to return. We're going to return our percentage as double times the maximum angle. So if we're 100% to the edge, it's going to be 10. But if we're 50% to the edge, the angle will be 5. Now that we have this quick little function, let's put this into our app. So let's go back up. Underneath the scale effect, we'll call it .rotation effect. And we're going to add in the angle, open the parentheses, and then use the degrees completion. And the degrees accepts a double. So here we're going to call get rotation amount. All right, now if I click resume on the canvas, when I drag to the right, it is scaling, it's moving, and it's also rotating to the right. And when I go to the left, it's now rotating to the left. And this looks really good. This looks much more like what Tinder or Bumble look like. All right, and I absolutely love this because previously in using UIKit without SwiftUI, this was fairly complex to code. But we just did it in a couple minutes, and I just walked you through it. So if you did this by yourself, you could probably do it even faster now. So this looks great. This is so natural and appealing from a user experience perspective. And I'm going to finish up this video with one more real world example because this next example I've seen more and more in apps. It's super common. And I've also seen a lot of people asking questions on how to do it. So I think you guys are going to like it and really get some benefit from learning this. But it is going to be a decent amount of code. So what we're going to do is actually create a new file from this one because I don't want to ruin the code that we have here. So I'm going to open up the navigator. I'm going to right click on the navigator, create a new file. It's going to be a SwiftUI view. And we're going to call this DragGesture Bootcamp 2. Go ahead and click create. Let's click resume on the canvas to make sure we're all connected. I'm going to close the navigator again. And let's start this off by just creating our screen here. So I'm going to put a Z stack on the screen. Open the brackets. I'm going to start this off by creating a background just to differentiate the different views on our app here. So let's do color.green.ignores safe area. We have our green background. And on top of this, we're going to create another view. So let's start by just adding a VStack. Open the brackets. At the top of the VStack, I'm going to add an image with a system name. We'll do chevron.down. Just this little down icon here. Sorry, let's actually do .up. Below that, let's add some text. We'll say sign up. Let's give this a font of headline, font weight of semi-bold. Below that, let's add maybe like an image or something. We'll do another image. We'll do system name of flame.fill. This one, let's make resizable. Let's make it .fit, scaled to fit. Let's give it a frame of maybe 100 by 100 seems fine. And then below this image, let's add some more text saying, this is the description for our app. This is my favorite SwiftUI course, and I recommend to all of my friends to subscribe to Swiftful Thinking. Alright, let's give this a multi-line text alignment of center. And then let's add one more text that says create an account. And this text, let's give it a background of color.black with a corner radius of 10. Let's give it a foreground color of white, a font of headline, and let's add some padding and then some extra horizontal padding. Alright, a lot of setup here, but we're going to create a really cool screen, so you guys are about to see why we're doing this. Let's change the spacing on this VStack to be maybe 20 spacing. This looks good. Let's add a spacer underneath this text so it pushes all the way down to the bottom of the screen. And on this entire VStack, let's add a background of color.white. Let's do a little more modifications here. So Before we add this background, let's add a dot frame with a max width of infinity. So push it to the edges of the screen. After the background, let's give it a corner radius of maybe 30. Alright. So I want this to go to the bottom of the screen. So this whole Z stack, I'm going to call dot ignores safe area. We're going to use the edges completion. I don't need this keyboard here, and we'll just do the edge of bottom. So we're ignoring the bottom, and then let's just push it down from the top a little bit. So on that chevron up, let's just add a little bit of padding onto the top. So now we have a really basic sign up screen here, and let's make it its own view. So this whole VStack, I'm going to hold the command button, click on the VStack, extract subview. We're going to call it my sign up view. You can call it whatever you want, but let's click resume on the canvas to make sure we're all connected. So all that code that we just did is now in our sign up view, which is down here. And our actual DragGesture Bootcamp view just has the background color and the sign up view. So this is looking good. Now I want this view to be able to be dragged up from the bottom. I don't want it to start up here, but I want it to start at the bottom, and then I can drag it up so we can see this. This is very common in a lot of apps. So what we're going to do is actually start it by offsetting it down most of the screen. And we're just going to offset the Y. We're not going to do anything with the X because we don't want to move it left or right. So we're going to do at state var starting offset Y of type CG float. And we'll set this equal to UI screen dot main dot bounds dot height times, and let's do maybe 50% of the height and see what it looks like. So this sign up view, let's add an offset, and we're going to use the X and the Y. And the X we're not going to use, so we're just going to use the Y, and the Y of course will be the starting Y offset. If I click resume on the canvas, it should now start about 50% of the way down the screen. It looks good, but I want to actually push it even further. So let's do maybe 85%. Let's click resume one more time. 85% of the way down. That looks better. It's way off the screen now. But we do know that we have that whole view, and we want to be able to pull this view up. So what we're going to, of course, add is a dot gesture, and then this gesture is going to be a drag gesture. Open and close the parentheses, and we're going to do dot onChanged, and we're going to open the brackets, value in, and when we change this, we want to change the offset, of course. So let's add another at state var current drag offset Y of type CG float. We'll set it equal to 0 to start. And when we drag this up or down, we were just going to set the current drag offset Y equal to the value.translation.height. So before we use the translation, which is a CG size, which includes the X and the Y, but now we just want the Y, so that's just the height. And this looks better if we did it with animation. So we'll do with animation.spring, open brackets, put our drag offset inside, and now we need to use this on our view. So on the view, we'll add another dot offset Y, and it will be current drag offset Y. Let's click resume on the canvas, see if it works at all. So this looks cool if I drag it, but if I let go and I go to drag it again, it's gonna bounce back. It's gonna do some weird stuff. This time it even went off the screen. So we want to fix that on the onEnded call. So on the onEnded, we're going to add one more dot onEnded, open brackets, value in, and we're going to start this by just animating back to the current drag offset of 0. So we'll say with animation.spring, open brackets, current drag offset equals 0. If I resume again and I let go, it now bounces back to the bottom. And this is great, we're almost there. But now if I drag it up enough, I want it to actually lock into the top. I don't want it to keep going all the way down to the bottom. So just to make it a little clearer, underneath this sign up view, let's add a text to the screen. And let's use a backslash, open and close parentheses. And we're going to add the current drag offset. into this. So the current drag offset is here. And when we go up, we can see that it's actually a negative value, right? So if it's a negative maybe 150, so if it gets this high, I want it to actually animate and lock in at the top. But if it's less, if it's down here, let's keep it down at the bottom. So if our user really needs to drag it to go all the way to the top. So we want to check if that current drag offset Y, which is what's in the middle of the screen here, if it's less than negative 150, right? So if it's greater than negative 150, it's going to be down here. But if it's less than negative 150, it'll be up here, and then we want it to bounce up to the top. So we'll say if current drag offset Y is less than negative 150, open brackets. And now we need one more variable to hold this in place when it locks to the top. So we're going to say at state var ending offset Y of type CG float. We'll set it equal to 0 to start. Let's put that also on our view, so we'll do .offset Y ending offset Y. And if this is less than negative 150, you want to lock it in at that starting state. So basically we just need to cancel out that starting offset Y. So I'm going to set the ending offset Y equal to negative starting offset Y. So these are just going to cancel each other out. So this offset and this offset will just cancel each other out. And when we do that, we're also going to set the current drag offset Y equal to 0. And of course we want to do it with animation. So instead of duplicating this with animation code, I'm just going to put all this logic into this with animation. So let's cut this, paste it into this with animation. And if it's less than negative 150, we're going to do that. And we'll say else. So if it's not less than that, we're going to set it back equal to 0. Let's check it out. Let's click resume on the canvas. So if it's greater than negative 150, so if it's at 100, somewhere down here, it'll bounce back. But if I go more than negative 150, it should bounce up to the top. And that was perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. But now we have this one problem that we can't get it back down, right? So if we're going down, we can see that these values here are always positive because we're dragging it down on the iPhone. So we want to add one more check that if we're in this top state and we go greater than 150, so this number in the center of the screen here, if this becomes greater than 150, we want to bounce back to the bottom. So what we're going to do here is first we'll check this. If it's less than negative 150, bounce it to the top. And then we're going to say else if ending offset Y is not equal to 0. Because we know ending offset Y is 0 when it's at the bottom, right? Because we started it at 0. So if there is an ending offset Y, we're at the top, right? So if ending offset Y is not equal to 0 and current drag offset Y is greater than 150. So if we're dragging that down more than 150 points, open brackets. And we'll put our else back in here. Now what do we want to happen? We want to just set the ending offset Y back equal to 0 and the current offset back equal to 0. So we'll do ending offset Y equals 0, current drag offset Y equals 0. Let's do it one more time. Drag her up. It's working. And right now if I go less than 150, it stays at the top. But if I go greater than 150, it bounces back down. So now we have our fully functioning app here. I noticed that we're setting the current drag offset Y to 0 on all of these calls. So instead of adding it 3 times, I'm just going to take it out of the else if statement so that it always executes. So I'm just going to paste it down here, get rid of this else, delete it here, clean up the code a little bit. And one more time, let's click resume on the canvas. We have our app. Let's get rid of the text too because it's just annoying to be in the center. So we have our app, sign up. Ooh, let me swipe it up. We have our new screen and we can swipe it down. This looks good and this is all working perfectly. There's no crashes, there's no bugs, and the spring animation makes this so smooth. This is a very good looking UI. Obviously you would add a different screen that probably looks better than what we have here, and this wouldn't be just a green background, this would be another screen in your app. but now you know how we can add these pop-ups into our app with just a couple lines of code. And honestly, we didn't have to do that much math to get this working perfectly. Alright, so that's it for this video. I know this was a long one, but we had a lot to cover. We covered cards like in a Tinder app, and we also covered these swipe up views, which are becoming so increasingly popular in app development. So now you know how to make this with just a couple lines of code, and really we didn't use that much math or logic. So this was awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you are learning something, and as always, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.